I arrived at my father's retirement party expecting recognition after 12 years working at his construction company, managing accounts and securing major contracts. The ballroom buzzed with business partners, family, and employees. My father, James, announced his succession plan publicly, giving everything to my lazy brother, Tyler, who barely shows up to work while declaring I should consider myself lucky to get a job at fast food restaurants. Tyler smirked and added, I would probably mess that up too. The room fell silent when corporate attorney Sarah Martinez cleared her throat and approached the microphone. Standing there in my navy blue dress that I had carefully chosen for what I thought would be my moment of recognition, I felt the blood drain from my face as my father's words echoed through the crystal ballroom of the downtown Marriott. The chandeliers cast an almost mocking sparkle over the assembled crowd of 150 guests, all of whom had just witnessed my public humiliation. For 12 years, I had poured my heart and soul into Bennett Construction. While Tyler stumbled in at 10 in the morning, reeking of alcohol, and left by 3, claiming he had important meetings, I worked 60-hour weeks managing client relationships, overseeing project budgets, and ensuring our construction sites met every safety regulation. Just 6 months ago, I had landed the Morrison Mall renovation contract worth $3.2 million, our biggest project in company history. The irony wasn't lost on me that Tyler's greatest professional achievement was crashing 2 company trucks in a single month and receiving 3 formal complaints for inappropriate behavior toward female subcontractors. Yet here he stood, adjusting his ill-fitting suit jacket with a satisfied grin, knowing he would inherit everything our grandfather Harold had built from nothing in 1972. My Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably at table 7, avoiding eye contact, while my cousin Michael stared down at his untouched slice of chocolate cake. The silence in the room felt suffocating, broken only by the distant sound of kitchen staff clearing dishes. I noticed several of our longtime employees, including Marcus Rodriguez, who had worked for us for 8 years, shaking their heads in disbelief. But then I heard something that made my stomach drop even further. From behind the floral centerpiece at the family table, I caught fragments of a whispered conversation between my Uncle Robert and his wife Susan. They planned this whole thing weeks ago, Susan murmured, glancing nervously toward my father. Robert overheard James and Tyler discussing how to handle Emma at the country club last month. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or even poor judgment on my father's part. This public degradation had been orchestrated deliberately. They had invited our entire professional network, our family, and our employees, specifically, to witness my humiliation. They wanted to ensure that everyone knew I would have no place in the future of Bennett Construction. My hands trembled as I reached for my water glass, trying to maintain some semblance of composure while my world crumbled around me. Tyler caught my eye, and his smirk widened, clearly enjoying every moment of my distress. I could feel tears threatening to spill over, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down completely. That's when I noticed Marcus Rodriguez standing up from his seat at the employee table. His weathered face showed a mixture of anger and determination as he looked directly at my father. Marcus had been our most trusted foreman, the man who had trained me on construction site safety protocols and taught me how to read architectural blueprints. His loyalty to our family ran deep, but his expression suggested that loyalty had limits. Just as I was contemplating whether I should quietly slip out through the kitchen exit to avoid further embarrassment, I heard the screech of microphone feedback. The sharp sound cut through the uncomfortable murmur of conversation like a knife, and every head in the ballroom turned toward the small stage where my father had delivered his crushing announcement just moments before. Sarah Martinez stood at the microphone with the confidence of someone who had practiced law for over 2 decades. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her charcoal gray suit commanded immediate respect. I had seen her at various company functions over the years, but I had always assumed she handled only corporate contracts and business filings. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, I apologize for the interruption, but there are some critical legal matters that must be addressed this evening. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the increasingly tense crowd. My father's face flushed red as he started to stand from his seat at the head table. Sarah, this isn't the time or place for business discussions. We can handle any paperwork on Monday morning. But Sarah held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Actually, James, this is exactly the right time and place, given the public nature of your succession announcement. She turned to address the full room. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've served as the Bennett family's estate attorney for the past 15 years, not merely as corporate counsel, as some of you may have assumed. The distinction sent a chill down my spine. Estate attorney meant she handled wills, inheritances, and family financial matters. Why would she be speaking up now unless there was something my father hadn't told us? Before his death 3 years ago, Sarah continued, Harold Bennett, the founder of this company, and James's father established very specific legal instructions regarding the future ownership of Bennett Construction. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. These instructions were not suggestions or informal wishes. They constitute a legally binding succession plan that takes precedence over any personal decisions James might make. Tyler's confident smirk began to falter. He shifted in his chair, suddenly looking less like a victorious heir and more like a confused child who had wandered into an adult conversation he couldn't follow. Harold Bennett spent considerable time observing both of his grandchildren as they grew into adulthood. Sarah explained, opening the folder with deliberate care. He watched Emma earn her bachelor's degree in business administration from Arizona State University, complete her certification in project management, and demonstrate consistent excellence in every aspect of construction operations. My heart began to pound as I realized where this was heading. My grandfather had always been quietly supportive of my career ambitions, often asking detailed questions about my projects and offering subtle guidance when I faced challenges. I had assumed his interest was simply familial affection, but perhaps there had been more deliberate evaluation happening than I had realized. Harold also observed Tyler's approach to professional responsibility. Sarah continued, her tone remaining diplomatically neutral despite the obvious implications. Based on his thorough assessment of both grandchildren's character, work ethic, and business acumen, Harold wrote very specific language into his estate planning documents. My father attempted another interruption. My father died 3 years ago, Sarah. His opinions about my children don't override my authority as the current owner of this company. Sarah's response was swift and definitive. Actually, James, they do. Harold retained certain controlling interests that transfer directly to his heir according to merit-based criteria he established. Those criteria are measurable, objective, and legally enforceable. The room had grown so quiet that I could hear the ice settling in water glasses 3 tables away. Business partners who had come expecting a celebration were now witnessing what appeared to be a legal challenge to everything they had just heard. The documentation states clearly that ownership of Bennett Construction should pass to whichever of Harold's grandchildren has demonstrated superior competence, ethical behavior, and dedication to the company's long-term success, Sarah announced. After reviewing 12 years of performance records, financial contributions, and professional conduct evaluations, the determination is unambiguous. She looked directly at me, and for the first time all evening, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt hope. Sarah Martinez opened a second folder, this one noticeably thicker than the first, and spread several documents across the small table beside the microphone. The papers appeared to be financial statements, bank records, and what looked like audit reports. My chest tightened as I recognized my own handwriting on several of the spreadsheets. Emma, Sarah said, addressing me directly, over the past 2 years, your meticulous bookkeeping and financial oversight have uncovered some very troubling discrepancies in the company accounts. She held up one of the documents. Do you remember the quarterly reports you prepared for the Morrison Mall project? I nodded slowly, my mind racing to understand the connection. Those reports had taken me weeks to complete because I had noticed several expense categories that didn't align with actual project costs. I had assumed the discrepancies were simple accounting errors or miscategorized expenses. Your detailed analysis revealed that approximately $2.7 million had been diverted from company operating accounts into unauthorized offshore banking arrangements. Sarah continued. The pattern of these diversions spans 5 years, with the amounts increasing significantly after Harold's death. The words hit the room like a bomb blast. I heard my mother, Linda, gasp audibly from her seat next to my father, and several business partners began whispering urgently among themselves. My father's face had gone from red to ashen white, and Tyler looked like he might be sick. James Bennett has been systematically embezzling from his own company. Sarah announced, her voice cutting through the shocked murmur of conversation. He established shell corporations, created false vendor accounts, and manipulated project budgets to hide the theft. The Morrison Mall contract that Emma secured included mandatory financial auditing requirements that exposed the entire scheme. Marcus Rodriguez stood up again this time, walking closer to the front of the room. His expression was grim but not surprised. I knew something was wrong. He called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had managed construction sites for decades. Equipment orders that never arrived, subcontractor payments that got delayed for no reason, safety equipment, budgets that kept getting cut. Emma was the only one asking the right questions. My father finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate croak. This is ridiculous. Those are legitimate business expenses, investment opportunities that Emma wouldn't understand because she doesn't have the experience to interpret complex financial arrangements. Sarah's response was immediate and devastating. James, we have copies of your personal banking statements showing direct deposits from these so-called investment opportunities. We also have documentation proving you used Tyler as an unwitting accomplice by having him sign authorization forms for transactions he didn't understand. Tyler's face drained of all color as the implications hit him. Dad, you told me those were routine approval forms for equipment purchases and vendor contracts. You said it was part of training me for management responsibilities. The betrayal in Tyler's voice was unmistakable. He had been used by our father just as surely as I had been excluded, manipulated into becoming an accessory to crimes he never intended to commit. For the first time in years, I felt genuine sympathy for my brother. The total amount embezzled exceeds $2.7 million, Sarah continued relentlessly. This includes funds stolen from employee pension contributions, safety equipment budgets, and client advance payments. Emma's honest record-keeping and insistence on financial transparency inadvertently documented every fraudulent transaction. Patricia Chen, one of our major client representatives, stood up from table 12. Her construction management company had worked with us on 6 major projects over the past 4 years. Emma was always the one who caught billing errors before they became problems. She said, her voice filled with newfound understanding. She insisted on detailed documentation for every expense, every change order, every material cost. I thought she was just naturally thorough, but she was actually protecting all of us from this fraud. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. My father's constant criticism of my attention to detail, his attempts to exclude me from financial planning meetings, his insistence that I focus on client relations rather than internal operations. He hadn't been dismissing my contributions because he thought I was incompetent. He had been trying to keep me away from the evidence of his crimes. Emma, Sarah said, turning back to me with what might have been the first genuine smile I had seen all evening. Your grandfather, Harold, suspected that financial improprieties might occur after his death. That's why he structured his estate planning to ensure that the most ethical and competent family member would ultimately gain control of the company. Your 12 years of honest, dedicated work haven't just secured your inheritance. They've saved Bennett Construction from complete financial collapse. Tyler suddenly pushed back from his chair, the metal legs scraping against the ballroom floor with a harsh screech that made several people wince. His face had transformed from confused shock to something harder, more calculating. The change was so dramatic that I barely recognized my own brother. "Wait just a minute," Tyler said, his voice carrying a new edge of desperation mixed with cunning. "If there's been financial fraud happening at Bennett Construction, then Emma had to be involved. She's been handling the books for years. There's no way all this money could disappear without the person managing the accounts knowing about it." A cold dread settled in my stomach as I realized what he was doing. Tyler was trying to throw me under the bus to save himself and our father. He strode toward the front of the room with newfound confidence, reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a folded stack of papers. "I've been suspicious about some of Emma's financial decisions for months," he announced, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his lie. "These documents show authorization signatures for several questionable transfers, all approved by Emma." My mouth fell open in shock. "Tyler, what are you talking about? I never authorized any unauthorized transfers. Every financial decision I made was documented and approved according to company policy." But Tyler was already spreading his papers across the table next to Sarah's documents. "These transfer authorizations bear Emma's signature," he declared triumphantly. "If Dad was moving money around, Emma had to be his partner in it. She's trying to frame him now that she realizes they're about to get caught." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, the ballroom seemed to tilt around me as the implications sank in. Tyler wasn't just trying to deflect blame from our father. He was actively trying to destroy my reputation and possibly send me to prison for crimes I had never committed. Sarah Martinez moved swiftly to examine Tyler's documents, her experienced eyes scanning the papers with professional efficiency. After a moment, she looked up with an expression that was equal parts disgust and amusement. "Tyler," she said, her voice dripping with controlled contempt, "these signatures are forgeries, and rather poor ones at that. The handwriting analysis will easily prove they're fraudulent, but more importantly, we have security camera footage from the company offices showing exactly when and how these false documents were created." Tyler's confident facade cracked slightly, but he pressed forward with desperate determination. "That's impossible. Emma signed those forms herself. I watched her do it." "Actually," came a voice from table 15, "you watched me do it." Patricia Williams, our office manager for the past 6 years, stood up with her own folder of papers. Her normally cheerful demeanor had been replaced by steely resolve. "Tyler asked me to trace Emma's signature on several blank authorization forms last month. He told me it was for a surprise recognition ceremony where Emma would receive credit for financial improvements she had implemented. He said he wanted to have pre-signed forms ready to present as a gift." The betrayal cut deeper than anything my father had said during his speech. Tyler hadn't just been passively incompetent or manipulated by our father. He had been actively working to frame me for crimes I had never committed. He had planned to destroy my career and potentially my freedom to protect himself. Patricia kept copies of everything. Sarah continued, including security footage of Tyler instructing her on how to replicate Emma's signature style. We also have recorded phone conversations between Tyler and James discussing their plan to blame Emma for the embezzlement if they were ever discovered. Tyler's face had gone completely white now, and sweat was beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the ballroom. "You're lying," he said, but his voice had lost all conviction. "Dad and I never planned anything like that." Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward again, his weathered hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Tyler, I heard you on the phone with your father 2 weeks ago in the construction trailer. You were practicing how to explain why Emma's signatures were on those forms. You were planning to throw your own sister under the bus to save your worthless hide." The room erupted in murmurs of shock and disgust. I could see several family members shaking their heads in disappointment, and business partners were beginning to distance themselves physically from our family table. But what hurt most was the realization that this betrayal had been planned well in advance. Tyler and my father hadn't just decided to humiliate me tonight. They had been preparing for months to frame me for serious financial crimes if their embezzlement was ever discovered. They had been willing to send me to prison to protect themselves. The recording equipment in James's office has been active for the past 6 months. Sarah announced, delivering what seemed to be the final blow. We have documented evidence of Tyler and James rehearsing their plan to blame Emma for their crimes, including discussions about which federal prison would be most suitable for a young woman convicted of white-collar fraud. The casual cruelty of that detail nearly brought me to my knees. They hadn't just planned to frame me, they had actually researched where I would be imprisoned if their plan succeeded. Tyler made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. None of this matters because Dad owns the company legally. Whatever Grandpa's will says, Dad has been running Bennett Construction for 3 years since Grandpa died. He has the right to make whatever financial decisions he wants. Sarah's smile was predatory as she reached for yet another folder. Actually, Tyler, your grandfather anticipated that possibility as well, which brings us to some additional documentation that I think everyone needs to hear. The ballroom fell into complete silence as all eyes turned back to Sarah Martinez, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. My mother, Linda, rose slowly from her seat at the head table, her movements deliberate and composed in a way I had never seen before. Sarah. My mother said, her voice steady and clear. I think it's time we shared the rest of the story. I stared at my mother in confusion. Throughout my entire life, Linda Bennett had been the epitome of the supportive wife who deferred to her husband's decisions. She attended his business functions, managed the household, and rarely spoke up during family discussions about the company. Seeing her take control of the situation felt like watching a stranger wear my mother's face. Linda walked to the front of the room with quiet confidence, carrying a leather portfolio I had never seen before. For the past 3 years, she began, ever since my father-in-law Harold died, I've been watching my husband destroy everything Harold built. I've watched him steal from the company, manipulate our children, and betray the trust of every employee and partner who believed in Bennett Construction. My father James looked like he had seen a ghost. Linda, what are you doing? Sit down and let me handle this. But my mother ignored him completely, opening her portfolio to reveal a thick stack of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be electronic devices. I've been documenting every crime, every lie, and every cruel plan James and Tyler have made, she continued. For 3 years, I've been gathering evidence while pretending to be the obedient wife who doesn't understand business matters. She held up a small digital recording device. This contains over 40 hours of recorded conversations between James and Tyler, including detailed discussions about framing Emma for embezzlement, destroying her professional reputation, and ensuring she could never work in construction again. The revelation hit me like a thunderbolt. My quiet, seemingly passive mother had been conducting her own investigation for 3 years, while I had been working myself to exhaustion trying to prove my worth to a father who was planning to betray me. My mother had been secretly building a case against him. Linda? James said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. If you think you can turn against your own family. My family. Linda's voice rose for the first time, carrying a fury I had never heard before. James, you threatened to divorce me and leave me with nothing if I didn't stay silent about your crimes. You told me that if I ever spoke up, you would ensure I was financially ruined and cut off from my children permanently. She turned to address the room, her composure returning as she laid out the evidence with methodical precision. James opened offshore bank accounts using forged documents that included my signature. He created a fake paper trail suggesting I was a willing participant in the embezzlement scheme. If the authorities had discovered his crimes, I would have been charged as a co-conspirator. The cruelty of my father's planning was becoming clear. He hadn't just stolen money from the company. He had systematically positioned every member of his family to take the blame if he was caught. Tyler, through the forged authorization, forms me through my legitimate bookkeeping responsibilities, and my mother through fraudulent documentation suggesting she was his accomplice. Sarah Martinez nodded approvingly as Linda continued her revelations. Mrs. Bennett came to me 18 months ago with her initial concerns about her husband's behavior. We've been working together ever since to build an ironclad case that would protect Emma and expose the true extent of James's criminal activities. Linda reached into her portfolio again, withdrawing a series of bank statements and financial records. These documents show that James diverted company funds not just into offshore accounts, but also into personal gambling debts payments, to a private investigator to dig up dirt on Emma's personal life, and bribes to city inspectors to overlook safety violations on our construction sites. Marcus Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. That explains why we kept getting hassled by different safety inspectors. James was paying off some of them and hoping the others wouldn't notice the violations. The most damaging evidence, Linda continued, is this recording from 2 months ago. She activated a different device, and suddenly the ballroom was filled with the sound of my father's and brother's voices. James's voice crackled through the speaker. If anyone gets suspicious about the missing money, we blame Emma. She signed off on all the legitimate transfers, so it'll be her word against ours. Tyler's response was equally chilling. What if she tries to fight back legally? She won't have the resources for a long court battle, James replied. We'll make sure she's fired and blacklisted from every construction company in the state. By the time we're done with her, she'll be lucky to get that job at Wendy's I mentioned. The recording continued for another 30 seconds with my father and brother laughing about the prospect of destroying my career and reputation. Hearing their casual cruelty played back in front of everyone who knew us professionally was devastating, but also strangely liberating. Finally, everyone could hear the truth about what kind of men they really were. There are dozens more recordings like this, Linda said, turning off the device. James and Tyler spent months planning not just how to steal from the company, but how to ensure Emma would be blamed for their crimes. They researched which federal prison she would most likely be sent to, how much legal debt she would accumulate defending herself, and how to ensure she could never rebuild her professional reputation. My father stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward with a crash. This is all lies and manipulation. Linda, you've obviously been coached by Sarah to say these things. None of this would hold up in court. But Linda was ready for his objection. She withdrew a final document from her portfolio, this one bearing official letterhead. Actually, James, it will hold up in court because I've already provided copies of all this evidence to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh has been investigating construction industry corruption for the past 18 months, and our case has become part of a much larger federal probe. The bombshell left the entire room speechless. This wasn't just a family dispute or a civil matter anymore. Federal agents were involved, which meant my father was facing serious criminal charges that could result in decades in prison. Tyler slumped back into his chair, finally understanding that his father's crimes had dragged him into a federal investigation. Mom, I didn't know about the FBI. Dad told me this was just creative accounting and tax planning. Linda's expression softened slightly as she looked at Tyler. Son, your father has been manipulating you just as much as he's been manipulating Emma and me. But the difference is that Emma never signed any fraudulent documents or helped cover up any crimes. You did, even if you didn't understand what you were really doing. The revelation about federal involvement seemed to break a dam of professional restraint that had been holding back our business partners and employees. David Morrison, the developer behind our largest current project, stood up from table 8 with obvious determination. I need to make something clear to everyone in this room. Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a commercial real estate empire worth over $50 million. The Morrison Mall renovation contract was specifically structured around Emma Bennett's involvement as project coordinator. My company insisted on that arrangement because Emma was the only person at Bennett Construction who consistently delivered quality work on time and within budget. He walked toward the front of the room, joining what was becoming an impromptu tribunal against my father and brother. James, your company was not our first choice for this project. We considered 4 other construction firms before selecting Bennett Construction, and Emma's track record was the deciding factor. Without her leadership, we would have hired someone else. Morrison turned to address the broader audience. Over the past 18 months, Emma has saved our project over $200,000 through her careful cost management and proactive problem solving. She caught design errors that would have required expensive corrections, negotiated better rates with subcontractors, and maintained safety standards that kept us ahead of schedule. Patricia Chen nodded from her seat and added her own testimony. Our architectural firm has worked with dozens of construction companies over the past decade. Emma Bennett is the most competent project manager we've ever encountered. She understands building codes, environmental regulations, and budget management better than most people with twice her experience. But Morrison wasn't finished. What makes this situation even more outrageous is that James has been billing our project for equipment and materials that were never delivered. Emma caught these discrepancies and brought them to our attention, but James told us they were simple accounting errors that would be corrected. The implications were staggering. My father hadn't just been stealing from the company's general accounts. He had been defrauding our clients directly, billing them for goods and services that were never provided. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward again, his weathered face showing a mixture of anger and determination. Mr. Morrison, those weren't accounting errors. James was ordering materials for your project, then diverting them to side jobs he was doing for cash payments. Emma spent hours trying to track down missing supplies, and James kept telling her the vendors were just running behind schedule. The pattern of deception was becoming clear to everyone in the room. My father had been using our legitimate business operations as cover for multiple layers of fraud, theft, and tax evasion. Jennifer Walsh, the banker who handled our company's credit facilities, raised her hand from table 11. I need to inform everyone that First National Bank has been conducting its own investigation into Bennett Construction's financial practices for the past 6 months. Emma's loan applications and financial reports have been the only documents from your company that consistently matched our independent verification processes. She stood up, consulting notes from a leather-bound organizer. James submitted loan applications containing false information about company revenues, asset valuations, and outstanding debts. If we had approved those loans based on his fraudulent applications, our bank would have lost approximately $1.4 million. The financial implications kept expanding beyond anything I had imagined. My father's crimes weren't limited to stealing from the company. He had been attempting to defraud banks, clients, vendors, and government agencies. Emma's honest financial reporting actually saved our bank from making a costly mistake, Walsh continued. Her documentation showed the true state of Bennett Construction's finances, which prevented us from approving loans that could never have been repaid. Robert Chen, who represented the local construction workers union, stood up from table 14. We've been documenting safety violations at Bennett Construction job sites for the past 2 years, he announced. Workers have been complaining about inadequate safety equipment, rushed construction schedules that compromise building codes, and pressure to cut corners that put people's lives at risk. Chen consulted his own notes before continuing. Emma Bennett has been the only person in management who responded seriously to our safety concerns. She implemented new protocols, purchased proper equipment out of her own budget allocations, and ensured that workers received adequate safety training. Marcus Rodriguez nodded vigorously. Emma made sure our guys had proper harnesses, updated their certifications, and followed OSHA regulations, even when James was cutting the safety budget. She probably prevented serious injuries or deaths with her attention to detail. The testimonials were painting a picture that was the exact opposite of my father's public characterization of my abilities. While he had been publicly dismissing me as incompetent business partners, employees and professional associates had been relying on my work to protect their interests and ensure successful project outcomes. Morrison pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. I have communications here between my company and Bennett Construction spanning the past 2 years. 93% of these messages are with Emma, not James. We stopped dealing with James directly because he was unreliable and often provided inaccurate information. He looked directly at my father with undisguised contempt. James, the only reason we maintained our contract with Bennett Construction was Emma's involvement. If she leaves your company, we'll terminate our agreement and pursue legal remedies for the fraudulent billing practices we've discovered. The message was clear and devastating. Not only was I not the liability, my father had portrayed me as I was actually the primary reason our major clients continued to work with Bennett Construction. Without me, the company would lose its most important contracts and face multiple lawsuits for fraud and breach of contract. I speak for several other business partners when I say that we will only continue our relationships with Bennett Construction if Emma assumes full operational control, Morrison concluded. James and Tyler have destroyed any trust we might have had in their leadership. Sarah Martinez had been listening to the testimonials with professional satisfaction, but now she returned to center stage with what appeared to be the most significant revelations yet. She opened a different folder, this one bound with a red ribbon and bearing an official legal seal. Harold Bennett was not just a successful businessman. Sarah began, her voice taking on a tone of deep respect. He was also a remarkably perceptive judge of character who understood that his son James had serious ethical deficiencies. She carefully untied the ribbon and spread out several documents that appeared significantly older than the materials she'd presented earlier. 6 months before his death, Harold updated his will and estate planning documents. This final version supersedes all previous versions and contains very specific provisions that directly address tonight's situation. My father attempted to interrupt, but Sarah's raised hand silenced him before he could speak. James Harold knew about your gambling debts, your questionable business practices, and your attempts to manipulate company finances for personal gain. He also knew that you would likely escalate these behaviors after his death. She held up the first document. This is Harold's final will, properly witnessed and notarized. It specifically disinherits James Bennett from all ownership stakes in Bennett Construction and related businesses due to what Harold termed demonstrated unfitness for fiduciary responsibility. The words hit the room like a physical blow. My grandfather had not just preferred me as his successor. He had actively removed my father from inheritance consideration because he knew my father was a criminal. The will transfers 100% ownership of Bennett Construction to Emma Bennett, effective immediately upon Harold's death 3 years ago. Sarah continued. James has been operating the company illegally for the past 3 years, essentially as an employee manager rather than as the owner he claimed to be. I felt the room spinning around me as the implications sank in. I hadn't just inherited partial ownership or been named as my father's successor. According to my grandfather's will, I had owned Bennett Construction completely for the past 3 years without knowing it. Harold also established a restitution fund specifically to address financial crimes he anticipated James might commit. Sarah explained, opening another document. This fund contains $4.2 million in liquid assets, more than enough to repay the money James embezzled and compensate clients for any fraudulent billing. Tyler's voice came out as a strangled whisper. What about me? Grandpa always said the business would stay in the family. Sarah's expression softened slightly as she addressed my brother. Tyler, Harold's will gives you a choice. You can accept a position as a supervised employee of Bennett Construction, complete an accredited business management program, and demonstrate 2 years of ethical behavior. If you meet these conditions, you'll receive a 25% ownership stake and profit-sharing arrangement. The offer was more generous than Tyler deserved, but it reflected my grandfather's hope that his grandson might still develop into a responsible adult with proper guidance and consequences. However, Sarah continued, her tone becoming stern, if Tyler chooses to contest the will or continues to participate in fraudulent activities, he will be permanently barred from any involvement with Bennett Construction and will receive no inheritance whatsoever. She opened yet another folder, this one containing what appeared to be a handwritten letter. Harold also left personal messages for each of his family members. Emma, your grandfather wanted you to read this. With trembling hands, I accepted the letter bearing my name in my grandfather's familiar handwriting. The paper felt fragile, but the words were written in his strong, confident script. My dearest Emma. I read aloud, my voice shaking with emotion. If you are reading this letter, it means that my suspicions about your father's character were correct, and you have discovered the truth about his crimes against our family and our business. I paused to wipe away tears before continuing. You have spent your entire career demonstrating the integrity, competence, and dedication that built Bennett Construction from nothing. While your father has been focused on taking what he never earned, you have been focused on giving value to everyone who trusts our family name. The personal validation from my grandfather was overwhelming. He had been watching my career development, recognizing my contributions, and planning to ensure I would inherit the company regardless of my father's attempts to exclude me. I am proud of the woman you have become. I continued reading, and I trust you to rebuild Bennett Construction according to the values that made our family name respected in this community. Your integrity is your greatest inheritance, and it will serve you better than any amount of money. The letter concluded with specific instructions about business partnerships, employee relationships, and expansion opportunities that my grandfather had been planning. He had not just left me the company, he had left me a detailed roadmap for transforming Bennett Construction into something even more successful than it had been under his leadership. Sarah retrieved another document from her materials. Harold also established ownership stakes for Emma in 2 other family businesses, Bennett Property Management and Southwest Equipment Rental. Combined, these holdings represent assets worth approximately $12 million. The scope of my inheritance was staggering. My grandfather hadn't just protected me from my father's crimes. He had positioned me to become one of the most successful businesswomen in our region. James. Sarah said, turning her attention back to my father, Harold's will requires you to make full restitution for all embezzled funds, cooperate completely with any criminal investigations, and accept permanent removal from any management role in Bennett family businesses. If you refuse these terms, criminal prosecution will proceed immediately. My father's face had cycled through several shades of red and white during Sarah's presentation, but now he looked completely defeated. The elaborate schemes he had constructed to steal money and frame his family members had been anticipated and neutralized by his own father's superior planning. This is impossible, he said weakly. Dad died 3 years ago. How could he have known what would happen? Sarah's smile contained no warmth whatsoever. Harold Bennett spent 50 years in the construction business, James. He knew exactly what kind of man you were, and exactly what you would do given the opportunity. He planned accordingly. The revelations about my grandfather's will seemed to unlock a flood of additional support from sources I had never expected. Robert Martinez, the local construction union representative, stood up from table 16 with obvious determination. Emma, there are some things you need to know about how the construction community has been responding to your father's management over the past 3 years, he said, consulting a thick folder of his own. The Southwest Construction Alliance has been documenting safety violations, labor disputes, and ethical complaints related to Bennett Construction since Harold's death. He opened his folder to reveal photographs, incident reports, and what appeared to be formal complaints filed with various regulatory agencies. We've received reports about workers being pressured to ignore safety protocols, subcontractors not being paid on schedule, and materials being diverted from authorized projects. Martinez walked toward the front of the room, his weathered hands holding the evidence of my father's mismanagement. The union has been preparing to recommend that our members refuse to work on Bennett construction projects because of safety concerns. But we kept hearing from individual workers that Emma Bennett was different, that she insisted on proper safety equipment and fair treatment. Marcus Rodriguez nodded emphatically. Emma made sure we got our safety certifications updated, that our equipment was properly maintained, and that we had adequate time to complete work according to building codes. She was the only person in management who treated us like human beings instead of disposable resources. Martinez continued his presentation. 3 months ago, the union leadership met with representatives from Morrison Development, Chen Architecture, and 4 other companies that regularly work with Bennett Construction. We were preparing to organize a boycott of all Bennett construction projects unless significant changes were made to management practices. The revelation was stunning. The construction community had been on the verge of destroying Bennett Construction's ability to operate, but they had been waiting to see if I would gain more influence over company operations. Emma, Martinez said, looking directly at me, every major contractor, supplier, and trade union in this region has been waiting for you to take control of Bennett Construction. We've been extending credit, maintaining partnerships, and accepting safety risks, specifically because we believed you would eventually fix the problems your father created. Jennifer Walsh from First National Bank stood up again. The banking community has been following the same approach. Emma's loan applications were the only ones we trusted. Her financial projections were the only ones that proved accurate, and her project management was the only reason we maintained confidence in Bennett Construction's viability. She consulted her leather organizer before continuing. Emma, we've pre-approved a $5 million operating credit line for Bennett Construction under your ownership. This financing was specifically structured to exclude James and Tyler from any access or authority. The scope of professional support was overwhelming. While I had been struggling to prove myself worthy of recognition within my own family, the entire business community had been waiting for me to gain the authority to fix the problems they knew existed. David Morrison stepped forward again. Emma Morrison Development has been planning a partnership expansion that would involve Bennett Construction in approximately $15 million worth of projects over the next 2 years. These plans were contingent on your leadership, not James's. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a bound proposal document. We've designed these projects specifically around your project management style and attention to detail. Several other development companies have been waiting to see whether you would gain control of Bennett Construction before committing to similar partnerships. Patricia Chen added her own contribution to the growing pile of evidence. The architectural community has been designing projects with Emma's capabilities in mind. We know she understands complex building codes, environmental regulations, and budget constraints better than most construction managers with decades more experience. Chen opened her own portfolio of materials. Emma, we have preliminary designs for 12 major projects that we've been holding back until Bennett Construction was under ethical leadership. These projects represent approximately $25 million in potential contracts. The economic implications were staggering. While my father had been stealing relatively small amounts from existing projects, his crimes had been preventing Bennett Construction from accessing tens of millions of dollars in legitimate business opportunities. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward with his own revelation. Emma, the construction workers have been talking about this situation for months. We've been documenting every time James cut safety corners, every time Tyler showed up drunk or failed to complete assigned tasks, and every time you had to fix problems they created. He reached into his back pocket and withdrew a worn notebook. We kept records because we knew eventually someone would need proof of what was really happening. James has been taking credit for Emma's work while blaming her for his own failures. Rodriguez opened his notebook to reveal pages of handwritten observations, dates, and incident descriptions. Emma worked weekends to fix Tyler's mistakes, stayed late to complete safety inspections that James skipped, and used her own money to buy equipment when James cut the safety budget. The testimonials were creating a picture of dedication and competence that contradicted every criticism my father had ever made about my abilities. While he had been publicly questioning my qualifications, the people who worked with me daily had been documenting my superior performance. Emma Martinez said, returning to his main point, the construction community has been waiting 3 years for this moment. We're prepared to offer Bennett Construction priority status for union labor preferred rates from suppliers and expedited permitting assistance from the city planning office. He smiled for the first time since standing up. We've been planning to celebrate the day you took control of the company. Tonight's events have been anticipated and welcomed by everyone who works in construction in this region. The support was overwhelming, but it also highlighted how much damage my father's leadership had done to our family's reputation. Bennett Construction had been surviving on my individual contributions, while the broader business community waited for the opportunity to work with ethical leadership. Tyler had been sitting in stunned silence as the testimonials and evidence mounted against our father. But as the scope of my support became clear, he suddenly stood up with what appeared to be desperate determination. Emma, I need to tell you something. He said, his voice shaking with emotion I had never heard from him before. Dad threatened my family. He said if I didn't go along with his plans, he would make sure Jennifer and the kids were left with nothing. Tyler's wife, Jennifer, who had been sitting quietly at the family table throughout the entire evening, nodded slowly and stood up beside her husband. Her face was pale, but her expression showed the relief of someone finally able to speak the truth. James told Tyler that if he didn't cooperate with the business plans, he would manipulate the company's legal structure to ensure Tyler couldn't provide for his children. Jennifer said, her voice gaining strength as she continued. He said he would destroy Tyler's credit, prevent him from getting employment anywhere else, and even suggested he might have to fabricate criminal charges to keep Tyler under control. The revelation added another layer of manipulation to my father's character. He hadn't just been stealing money and framing family members for his crimes. He had been using threats against grandchildren to coerce cooperation from his own son. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a smartphone, his hands trembling as he activated the recording function. I've been recording conversations with Dad for the past 2 months because Jennifer convinced me I needed proof of what he was really doing to our family. He scrolled through what appeared to be dozens of audio files. I have recordings of Dad threatening to hurt my kids, financially planning to frame Emma for crimes she didn't commit, and explaining how he would destroy anyone who opposed him. Tyler selected one of the recordings and played it for the room. James's voice crackled through the phone's speaker with chilling clarity. Tyler, if you think you can turn against me, remember that I control every aspect of your financial future. I can make sure your children never get college educations, never get good jobs, and never escape the consequences of crossing me. The casual cruelty in my father's voice was shocking, but Tyler's response on the recording was even more revealing. Dad, I'm scared of what you're doing to Emma. She doesn't deserve to be blamed for your mistakes. James's reply was immediate and threatening. Emma is expendable. Your children aren't. Make the right choice, son. Tyler stopped the recording and looked directly at me with tears in his eyes. Emma, I knew what Dad was doing to you was wrong, but I was terrified that if I stood up for you, he would take his anger out on my family. I've been a coward, and I've let you suffer, because I was too weak to protect you. The admission was more honesty than I had heard from Tyler in our entire adult lives. For the first time, I understood that his cruelty toward me hadn't necessarily reflected his true feelings, but rather his desperation to protect his own family from our father's threats. Jennifer stepped forward with her own evidence. I started documenting James's threats 3 months ago, when Tyler came home from a meeting looking terrified. She said opening a notebook similar to the one Marcus Rodriguez had shown earlier. James told Tyler that if he didn't sign the authorization forms and support the plan to blame Emma, he would ensure that our mortgage was called, in Tyler's credit was destroyed and that our children would be removed from their private school. She showed pages of handwritten notes, photographs of text messages, and printed emails that documented the systematic threats my father had made against Tyler's family. James also said he would tell the authorities that Tyler was the mastermind behind the embezzlement and that Tyler had manipulated Emma into helping him steal money. The threats were incredibly sophisticated and cruel. My father hadn't just been stealing money. He had been constructing an elaborate web of coercion and blackmail to ensure that everyone in the family was too terrified to oppose him. Tyler activated another recording, this one more recent. This is from last week when Dad was giving me final instructions for tonight's announcement. James's voice came through the speaker again. Tyler, after I announce the succession plan tonight, Emma will probably try to cause trouble. When she does, you'll present those authorization forms and explain that she's been embezzling money. The FBI investigation that's coming will focus on her instead of us. Tyler's voice on the recording responded, Dad, what if Emma can prove she didn't sign those forms? She can't prove anything if she's in federal prison, James replied with chilling casualness. By the time she gets out, if she gets out, Bennett Construction will be long gone and will be living somewhere without extradition treaties. The recording revealed that my father had been planning not just to frame me for his crimes, but to flee the country with stolen money, while I served prison time for embezzlement I had never committed. Emma. Tyler said, turning off the recording and facing me directly. I have 43 hours of recordings like this. Dad has been planning to destroy you for months, and he threatened to destroy my family if I didn't help him. I know that doesn't excuse what I've done, but I need you to understand that I never wanted to hurt you. He reached into his other pocket and withdrew a thick manila envelope. I also have photographs of the documents Dad asked me to sign, copies of the bank records he showed me to explain where the money was going, and evidence of the private investigator he hired to find compromising information about your personal life. The envelope contained dozens of documents that appeared to chronicle my father's criminal activities in detail. Tyler had been gathering evidence even while participating in the crimes, apparently preparing for the possibility that he might need to prove his own victimization. Tyler Sarah Martinez said examining some of the documents he had provided, this evidence could be crucial in ensuring that you're treated as a victim of coercion rather than as a willing participant in the embezzlement scheme. She looked at both Tyler and Jennifer with professional assessment. The federal investigation will need to determine whether Tyler's participation was voluntary or the result of threats and manipulation. This documentation suggests that James used coercion tactics that qualify as criminal intimidation. Tyler turned back to me with desperate sincerity. Emma, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I can't undo the damage I've done to your reputation and your feelings. But I want you to know that I've never believed the things Dad said about you. I've always known you were the competent one, the honest one, the one who deserved to inherit Grandpa's business. The admission was overwhelming. For years, I had believed that my brother's contempt for my abilities was genuine. Learning that his cruelty had been largely performance, motivated by fear for his family's safety, changed my understanding of our relationship completely. If you'll give me a chance, Tyler continued, I want to make this right. I want to testify against Dad, cooperate with the federal investigation, and prove that I can be the brother you deserved all along. My father, James, had been growing increasingly agitated as the evidence mounted against him, but Tyler's betrayal seemed to push him over the edge into desperate fury. He suddenly lunged toward the table where Sarah Martinez had spread out the legal documents, his face twisted with rage. This is all lies and manipulation, he shouted, sweeping his arm across the table and scattering papers across the ballroom floor. I built this company from nothing after my father died, and I'm not going to let some conspiracy between my ungrateful wife and daughter destroy everything I've worked for. Several guests gasped and pushed back from their tables as James's composure completely disintegrated. Marcus Rodriguez and David Morrison moved closer to the front of the room, clearly preparing to intervene if my father became physically threatening. "James," Sarah said with steely calm, "you need to step away from these legal documents immediately. Your behavior right now is being witnessed by over 100 people, and anything you do will be documented for the federal investigation." But my father ignored her warning, pulling out his cell phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling our lawyers right now," he declared. "I'm going to shut down every project, fire every employee, and liquidate every asset before I let Emma steal my company." He began frantically dialing numbers while shouting instructions into the phone. "Cancel the Morrison contract immediately. Withdraw all funds from the operating accounts. Fire Marcus Rodriguez and anyone else who testified against me tonight." The desperate attempt to destroy the company rather than lose control of it revealed just how narcissistic and vindictive my father truly was. He would rather see Bennett Construction completely eliminated than allow me to inherit what my grandfather had intended for me. However, Sarah Martinez was ready for exactly this type of response. She calmly withdrew another folder from her briefcase and opened it to reveal what appeared to be court documents bearing official judicial seals. "James, you cannot cancel contracts, withdraw funds, or fire employees," she announced clearly. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the federal court issued temporary restraining orders, preventing you from accessing any Bennett Construction accounts, making any personnel decisions, or altering any business relationships." My father's phone calls were getting increasingly frantic as the people he was trying to reach apparently weren't responding as he expected. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen?" he shouted into the phone. "I'm the owner of this company and I demand access to my own money." Sarah continued her explanation while my father raged into his phone. "Emma, your mother and I petitioned the court this morning for emergency protective orders. The judge reviewed the evidence of embezzlement and granted injunctions preventing James from taking any actions that could damage the company or harm potential criminal prosecution." She held up the official documents. "These restraining orders also protect company employees from retaliation, prevent the destruction of financial records, and ensure that all business operations continue under your authority rather than James's." My father ended his phone call and whirled around to face Sarah with wild eyes. "You can't do this to me. I'll sell the company equipment, I'll contact our competitors and give them our client lists. I'll make sure Bennett Construction never operates again." "Actually," Sarah replied with what might have been satisfaction, "you'll find that all company assets have been transferred into a protective trust administered by the federal court. You have no authority to sell equipment, no access to client information, and no ability to make any business decisions whatsoever." The thoroughness of the legal preparation was impressive. While my father had been planning to frame me for his crimes, my mother and Sarah had been working with federal authorities to ensure that he couldn't destroy the company out of spite when his schemes were exposed. Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward with his own revelation. "Mr. James, the employees already know what's happening. We've been in contact with Emma for the past 2 weeks, and we've all agreed to ignore any instructions that come from you or Schlers." He pulled out his own cell phone and showed my father a group text message thread. "Every foreman, every site supervisor, and every office worker has been told to take direction only from Emma starting today. Your attempt to fire us won't work because we've already transferred our loyalty to the person who actually deserves it." My father's desperation reached new heights as he realized that every aspect of his counterattack had been anticipated and neutralized. "Fine," he snarled. "If I can't control Bennett Construction, I'll make sure Emma can't either. I'll contact every competitor in the region and tell them exactly what kind of person she really is." But David Morrison was ready for this threat as well. "James, the business community has been waiting for this moment for 3 years. If you try to spread lies about Emma's character or competence, you'll find that your reputation is so damaged that nobody will believe anything you say." Morrison consulted his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be text messages. I've been in contact with 12 other major developers and contractors during this evening's revelations. Everyone is prepared to issue public statements supporting Emma's integrity and denouncing your criminal behavior. Patricia Chen added her own support. The architectural community has already drafted a letter of recommendation for Emma that will be published in the regional construction industry newsletter. Your attempts to damage her reputation will backfire because everyone who has worked with both of you knows who the competent professional really is. My father's final desperate gambit was to threaten the family relationships themselves. "Linda," he said, turning to my mother with menacing intensity, "if you think you can divorce me and take half of everything I've built, you're mistaken. I'll fight you in court for decades, and I'll make sure you don't get a penny." But my mother was ready for this threat too. "James," she said with calm confidence, "I filed for divorce 2 months ago. The paperwork has been sealed pending the resolution of the federal criminal investigation, but the legal process is already underway." She reached into her portfolio one more time. "I've also filed for a protective order requiring you to maintain distance from me, from Emma, and from Tyler's family. If you attempt to contact any of us outside of supervised legal proceedings, you'll be arrested for violating a federal court order." The comprehensive nature of the planning was becoming clear. Every possible retaliation my father might attempt had been anticipated and prevented through legal channels, employee coordination, and business community cooperation. "This isn't over," my father said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I'll find ways to destroy all of you that you haven't thought of yet." Sarah Martinez stood up and activated her own recording device. "James, you just threatened multiple people in front of over 100 witnesses. Those threats will be included in the federal prosecution file, and they demonstrate exactly the kind of character that led your father to disinherit you in the first place." As if summoned by my father's escalating threats, the ballroom's main doors opened to admit 4 people in dark suits who walked with the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement officers. The lead figure, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, approached the front of the room with official credentials in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Special Agent Jennifer Walsh with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced, her voice carrying absolute authority. "We apologize for interrupting your event, but we have warrants to execute and arrests to make." The entire ballroom fell into stunned silence as the reality of federal involvement became immediate and concrete. This wasn't just a family dispute or civil litigation anymore. Federal agents were taking people into custody. Agent Walsh consulted a folder of documents while 2 other agents positioned themselves near the exits. "James Bennett, you are under arrest for federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." My father's face went completely white as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The transformation from arrogant patriarch to federal prisoner was swift and devastating. "This is a mistake," he stammered. "I demand to speak with my attorney immediately." "You'll have that opportunity after you've been processed," Agent Walsh replied professionally. "Tyler Bennett, you are also being taken into custody, but your status is currently listed as a cooperating witness rather than a primary defendant. Your cooperation over the past 2 months has been noted by the prosecution team." Tyler nodded with obvious relief as a different agent approached him with handcuffs. "I understand, Agent Walsh. I'm prepared to testify fully about everything my father forced me to do." Agent Walsh turned to address the broader room. "For everyone else present tonight, this arrest is the culmination of an 18-month federal investigation into corruption within the regional construction industry. Bennett Construction's case became central to our investigation when Mrs. Linda Bennett contacted our office with evidence of financial crimes." She gestured toward my mother with obvious respect. Mrs. Bennett's cooperation, along with evidence provided by Emma Bennett's meticulous financial record-keeping, has helped us expose a network of corruption involving multiple companies, city officials, and financial institutions. The scope of the investigation was far larger than I had imagined. My father's crimes weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a broader pattern of corruption that federal authorities had been tracking across the entire construction industry. Emma Bennett. Agent Walsh said, turning to me directly, "Your honest business practices and detailed documentation have been crucial in exposing this criminal network. Several other construction companies have been billing clients for materials never delivered, paying bribes to city inspectors, and manipulating safety records to hide violations." She opened her folder to reveal photographs and documents that appeared to involve companies I didn't recognize. "Your insistence on proper documentation and ethical practices actually helped us identify patterns of corruption that extended far beyond your family's business." Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious curiosity. "Agent Walsh, does this investigation affect other companies we've worked with?" "We'll be making additional arrests over the next several weeks," she confirmed. "The evidence trail from Bennett Construction led us to discover bid rigging schemes, safety inspection fraud, and tax evasion involving approximately 12 other companies in this region." The revelation that my ethical approach to business had inadvertently exposed an entire criminal network was both overwhelming and gratifying. While I had been struggling to prove myself worthy of respect within my own family, I had been contributing to law enforcement efforts to clean up corruption throughout the industry. Agent Walsh consulted her notes before continuing. "James Bennett's embezzlement was actually relatively small compared to some of the other schemes we've uncovered. However, his attempts to frame family members for his crimes, combined with his threats against witnesses, have resulted in additional federal charges that carry significant prison sentences." She looked directly at my father, who was still handcuffed and flanked by federal agents. "Mr. Bennett, your recorded threats against your wife, daughter, and son constitute witness intimidation under federal law. These charges alone carry potential sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison." The mathematical reality of my father's situation was staggering. Even if he somehow avoided conviction on the financial crimes, the witness intimidation charges were supported by dozens of recordings and over 100 witnesses to his behavior tonight. "Tyler Bennett's cooperation has been extensive and valuable," Agent Walsh continued. "He provided recordings, documentation, and testimony that corroborated evidence we had gathered through other sources. His willingness to expose his father's crimes despite personal risks will be considered favorably during sentencing proceedings." She turned back to me with what appeared to be genuine admiration. "Emma, your grandfather, Harold Bennett, contacted our office 6 months before his death with concerns about potential criminal activity within Bennett Construction. He provided us with financial records and asked us to monitor the situation after his death." The final revelation about my grandfather's foresight was stunning. He hadn't just anticipated my father's crimes and prepared legal protections. He had actually contacted federal law enforcement to ensure that criminal prosecution would be possible when the evidence was sufficient. "Harold Bennett was a remarkable man," Agent Walsh said. "He knew his son was likely to escalate his criminal behavior after gaining full control of the company, and he wanted to ensure that justice would be served when that happened." She gestured toward Sarah Martinez with obvious respect. The estate planning documents Harold prepared, combined with the federal investigation he initiated, created a comprehensive legal framework that has allowed us to prosecute these crimes effectively while protecting the legitimate business interests he wanted to preserve. As the agents prepared to escort my father and brother from the ballroom, Agent Walsh made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, Bennett Construction will continue operating under Emma Bennett's ownership. The federal investigation has cleared her of any involvement in the criminal activities, and we anticipate that the company's reputation will be enhanced rather than damaged by tonight's events." The irony was perfect. My father's attempt to destroy my career and reputation had instead resulted in federal recognition of my integrity and competence, while his own reputation and freedom were destroyed by his criminal choices. In the immediate aftermath of the arrests, the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted dramatically from shock and tension to something approaching celebration. As soon as the federal agents escorted my father and brother from the room, David Morrison stood up and began applauding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced, his voice carrying over the murmur of conversation, "I think we've just witnessed one of the most remarkable demonstrations of integrity and courage in the history of our business community." The applause spread throughout the room as guests rose to their feet in recognition of what had transpired. For the first time all evening, I felt tears of relief and gratitude rather than humiliation and betrayal. Patricia Chen joined Morrison at the front of the room, carrying what appeared to be an official proclamation. Emma, the City Planning Commission, met in emergency session this afternoon after receiving advance notice of tonight's events. We voted unanimously to award you the Municipal Service Recognition for your contributions to ethical construction practices and public safety. She unfolded the document and began reading. Whereas Emma Bennett has consistently demonstrated superior professional competence, ethical leadership, and commitment to public welfare in her management of construction projects within our city limits, and whereas her diligent record-keeping and adherence to safety protocols have prevented potential injuries and property damage, the City Planning Commission hereby recognizes her as Construction Professional of the Year. The recognition was unexpected and deeply meaningful. While my father had been publicly dismissing my capabilities, city officials had been documenting my contributions to public safety and professional standards. Sarah Martinez approached me with yet another folder, this one containing documents that appeared to be financial statements and investment records. "Emma, there are some additional aspects of your grandfather's estate planning that we haven't discussed yet." She opened the folder to reveal bank statements and investment portfolios I had never seen before. Harold Bennett established several educational and professional development accounts specifically for your benefit. He anonymously funded your college education, paid for your professional certifications, and invested in your continuing education without your knowledge. The revelation explained some mysteries from my past. I had received several unexpected scholarships and training opportunities that had seemed almost too good to be true, but I had assumed they were based on merit alone. Harold also established an investment portfolio in your name that has been growing for the past 15 years. Sarah continued. The current value is approximately $800,000, intended to provide you with financial security as you assume leadership of Bennett Construction. The scope of my grandfather's planning was breathtaking. He'd been preparing me for business leadership not just through work experience, but through financial education and professional development that I hadn't even realized was happening. Robert Martinez from the construction union stepped forward with his own announcement. Emma, the Southwest Construction Alliance, voted this morning to offer Bennett Construction preferred status for all municipal and commercial projects. This designation is usually reserved for companies with at least 20 years of exemplary performance. He consulted his notes before continuing. Based on your individual track record and the testimony we've heard tonight, we're also prepared to recommend Bennett Construction for the Regional Excellence in Construction Award, which includes priority consideration for state and federal government contracts. The professional recognition was overwhelming, but Marcus Rodriguez had even more significant news. Emma, the employees took a vote before the arrests happened. We want you to know that 100% of Bennett construction workers are committed to staying with the company under your leadership. He smiled with obvious pride. We've also been talking to workers from other construction companies who want to join Bennett Construction because of your reputation for fair treatment and safety standards. We could expand our workforce by 50% within the next 6 months if we have enough projects to support additional hiring. The employee loyalty was the most meaningful recognition of all. The people who worked most closely with me had complete confidence in my leadership abilities, even though my own father had publicly questioned my competence. Jennifer Walsh from First National Bank rejoined the conversation with her own professional developments. Emma, based on tonight's events and the federal investigation results, our bank is prepared to offer Bennett Construction a $10 million credit facility for expansion and equipment purchases. She consulted her leather organizer. We're also prepared to finance the acquisition of competing companies that may become available as a result of the ongoing federal investigation. Several construction firms involved in the corruption network may be forced to sell their assets to pay legal costs and restitution requirements. The business opportunities were expanding beyond anything I had ever imagined. My father's crimes had apparently created market opportunities for ethical companies to acquire additional resources and expand their operations. Emma Sarah Martinez said, returning to her legal materials, "There's one more aspect of your grandfather's planning that I think will interest you. He established a foundation in your name that's been operating for the past 3 years." She withdrew another set of documents. The Harold Bennett Construction Ethics Foundation has been providing scholarships for women pursuing careers in construction funding, safety equipment for small construction companies, and supporting research into improved building safety standards. The foundation had been operating with an initial endowment of $2 million, supplemented by annual contributions from several other construction companies that had been inspired by my grandfather's ethical leadership. "Harold wanted you to discover the foundation after you inherited Bennett Construction," Sarah explained. "He believed that ethical business practices should be actively promoted throughout the industry, and he wanted you to lead those efforts." The responsibility was daunting but incredibly meaningful. My grandfather hadn't just left me a successful business. He had positioned me to become a leader in promoting ethical standards throughout the entire construction industry. David Morrison had been consulting his phone throughout these revelations, and now he approached with obvious excitement. "Emma, I've been in contact with development companies throughout the Southwest region. Based on tonight's events, Morrison Development has received inquiries from firms in Phoenix, Denver, and Las Vegas about partnering with Bennett Construction on major projects." He showed me his phone screen, which displayed a series of text messages and email notifications. "These are preliminary discussions about approximately $40 million in potential contracts over the next 3 years. Your reputation for integrity and competence has apparently spread far beyond our local market." The scale of opportunity was staggering. My father's public humiliation of me had inadvertently become a demonstration of my character and abilities in front of exactly the people who could provide business opportunities I had never dreamed possible. As the immediate excitement of recognition and business opportunities began to settle, I found myself facing the more complex challenge of rebuilding relationships with family members who had remained silent during my public humiliation but were now eager to express their support. My Aunt Patricia approached me with obvious embarrassment, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Emma, I owe you an enormous apology for not speaking up when your father was treating you so cruelly tonight. I was shocked by what he said, but I was too cowardly to challenge him in front of everyone." She paused, struggling to find words for her regret. "I've watched you work harder than anyone else in this family for years, and I knew your father was wrong to dismiss your contributions. I should have said something, and I'm ashamed that I stayed silent when you needed support." My cousin Michael joined his mother, his own expression showing similar regret. "Emma, several of us were actually planning to speak up if Sarah Martinez hadn't intervened when she did. We couldn't believe Dad was being so unfair to you, but we were waiting to see if the situation would resolve itself without causing a family confrontation." The apologies were appreciated, but they also highlighted how isolated I had been within my own family. Even relatives who recognized my father's unfairness had been unwilling to support me publicly until the legal revelations made it safe to do so. My Uncle Robert stepped forward with his own contribution to the family reckoning. "Emma, I need to tell you that I've been documenting James's behavior toward you for the past 2 years. I was planning to offer you a position with my landscaping business if Bennett Construction became completely unbearable. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card and what appeared to be a job offer letter. I've been preparing a partnership proposal that would have allowed you to start your own construction company, with financial backing from several family members who believed you deserved better treatment. The revelation that extended family members had been planning their own intervention was both touching and frustrating. While I appreciated their concern, their willingness to help me escape rather than confront the problem directly showed how much my father's bullying behavior had intimidated the entire family. My mother, Linda, approached with her own agenda for rebuilding family relationships. Emma, I want you to know that my decision to gather evidence against your father wasn't just about protecting you from criminal charges. I was also trying to preserve the possibility of genuine family relationships based on honesty rather than fear. She opened her portfolio to reveal what appeared to be personal letters and family photographs. I've been documenting not just James's crimes, but also his emotional abuse of everyone in the family. Tyler's children have been afraid to visit their grandfather because of his unpredictable anger, and I've been worried about the psychological impact of his behavior on all of us. The broader pattern of abuse was becoming clear. My father's treatment of me hadn't been an isolated problem. It had been part of a systematic pattern of controlling and intimidating family members to maintain his authority. Linda. Sarah Martinez said, consulting her legal materials, the family therapy and counseling services we discussed will be available as part of the estate planning implementation. Harold anticipated that recovering from James's abuse would require professional support for everyone involved. She opened another folder containing what appeared to be contact information and service descriptions. Harold established a family counseling fund specifically to help family members heal from whatever damage James might inflict during his period of control over the company. My grandfather's foresight had extended even to anticipating the psychological consequences of my father's behavior and ensuring that resources would be available to help the family recover. Tyler's wife, Jennifer, approached me with her own perspective on family healing. Emma, Tyler's been in individual counseling for the past 3 months, trying to understand why he was so willing to hurt you to protect himself. He knows that fear doesn't excuse the cruelty, and he's committed to becoming the brother you deserved all along. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Tyler realizes now that standing up to your father earlier might have prevented a lot of the damage that's been done to everyone. He's prepared to spend as long as it takes, proving that he can be trustworthy and supportive. The possibility of a genuine relationship with my brother was appealing, but I knew that rebuilding trust would require consistent demonstration of change over an extended period. Patricia Chen, who had been observing the family dynamics with professional interest, offered her own insight. Emma family business relationships require the same kind of structural planning that construction projects do. You'll need clear boundaries, defined responsibilities, and measurable accountability to ensure that past patterns don't repeat themselves. Her observation was insightful. Rebuilding family relationships would require the same systematic approach that had made me successful in construction management. Emma. My mother said, returning to her personal agenda, I'm planning to start an interior design business that could partner with Bennett Construction on residential and commercial projects. I want to build something positive from this situation rather than just escaping from the damage James caused. She showed me preliminary business plans and portfolio materials that demonstrated serious preparation. I've been developing these plans for 6 months with Sarah's legal assistance and financial guidance from Harold's Foundation. This isn't just a reaction to tonight's events. It's been a long-term strategy for creating healthy family business relationships. The prospect of working professionally with my mother was intriguing and potentially very successful. Her eye for design combined with my project management skills could create unique value for clients who wanted comprehensive construction and interior design services. Marcus Rodriguez had been listening to the family discussions with obvious interest. Emma, the construction workers have been talking about what kind of company culture we want to build under your leadership. We'd like to suggest some employee family support programs that might help everyone heal from the toxic environment James created. His suggestion pointed toward a broader opportunity to transform Bennett Construction's culture in ways that would benefit not just my family, but all of the employees who had suffered under my father's abusive management style. 6 months after that transformative evening, I stood in the newly renovated offices of Bennett Construction, looking out at a bustling construction yard that had been completely transformed under ethical leadership. The changes had exceeded everyone's expectations, including my own. The first major transformation had been implementing the comprehensive business plan my grandfather had hidden in his estate documents. Harold's vision for expanding Bennett Construction into commercial development and environmentally sustainable building practices had proven remarkably prescient. Emma, Marcus Rodriguez said, entering my office with a satisfied grin, the employee profit-sharing program just distributed its first quarterly payments. Every worker received an average bonus of $3,200, and morale has never been higher. The profit-sharing program had been one of my first initiatives, designed to ensure that the people who created Bennett Construction's success shared directly in the financial benefits. The results had been dramatic improvements in productivity, quality, and job satisfaction. The safety program results are even more impressive. Marcus continued consulting his tablet computer. We've had 0 workplace injuries for 5 consecutive months, compared to an average of 12 injuries per month under your father's management. The safety improvements had resulted not just from better equipment and training, but from creating a workplace culture where employees felt empowered to speak up about potential hazards without fear of retaliation. Jennifer Walsh, from First National Bank, had become a regular visitor as Bennett Construction's expansion required increasingly sophisticated financial services. Emma, your company's credit rating has improved to the highest level in our bank's history. Your transparent financial management and consistent profitability have made Bennett Construction our most trusted business partner. The financial transformation had been remarkable. By eliminating my father's embezzlement and implementing efficient cost management, Bennett Construction's profitability had increased by 67%, while actually reducing prices charged to clients. The expansion into green construction has been incredibly successful, Jennifer continued. Your solar panel installation projects and energy-efficient building retrofits have generated over $2 million in revenue this quarter alone. The environmental focus had attracted clients who were willing to pay premium prices for sustainable construction practices, creating a profitable niche market that my grandfather had anticipated would become increasingly important. Tyler entered my office carrying project plans and wearing work clothes that showed evidence of actual construction site involvement. His transformation had been one of the most surprising aspects of the past 6 months. Emma, the Morrison Mall project, finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 8% under budget. He reported with obvious pride. The client has already contracted us for 3 additional projects based on our performance. Tyler's completion of a comprehensive business management program combined with addiction counseling and family therapy had revealed capabilities I hadn't known he possessed. With proper support and clear expectations, he had developed into a competent project supervisor. The federal prosecutors confirmed that Tyler's cooperation was exemplary. Sarah Martinez said, joining our meeting with legal updates. His testimony was crucial in convicting not just your father, but also 5 other construction company owners involved in the corruption network. Tyler's willingness to testify against criminal associates had required considerable courage, but it had also demonstrated his commitment to ethical business practices going forward. James received a sentence of 18 years in federal prison, Sarah continued. The judge specifically noted that his attempts to frame family members and intimidate witnesses showed a level of moral bankruptcy that warranted the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines. The justice system had delivered appropriate consequences for my father's crimes, providing closure for everyone he had victimized through his fraudulent and abusive behavior. David Morrison arrived for our scheduled partnership meeting, bringing news of even larger business opportunities. Emma, the Regional Development Authority, has selected Bennett Construction as the primary contractor for the new municipal complex project. The contract value is $12.4 million, and it's specifically based on your company's reputation for ethical practices and superior quality. The municipal contract represented recognition from the highest levels of regional government that Bennett Construction had become the gold standard for construction integrity and competence. We're also finalizing partnerships with development companies in 4 other states. Morrison continued, "Your reputation for ethical business practices has spread throughout the Southwest region, and major developers want to work with a company they can trust completely." The interstate expansion opportunities represented growth potential that would transform Bennett Construction from a regional company into a major player in the Southwest construction market. Patricia Chen had brought architectural plans for what would be Bennett Construction's largest project to date. "Emma, we've designed a mixed-use development that incorporates every innovation in sustainable construction that your grandfather envisioned. The project will serve as a showcase for environmentally responsible building practices throughout the region." The Sustainable Development Project represented the convergence of ethical business practices, environmental responsibility, and profitable construction that my grandfather had believed would define the industry's future. My mother, Linda, arrived with her own business update, carrying portfolio materials that showed the successful growth of her interior design partnership with Bennett Construction. "Emma, our collaboration has generated over $800,000 in combined revenue this quarter. Clients love the convenience of coordinated construction and interior design services." The family business partnership had evolved into a model for how relatives could work together productively when relationships were based on mutual respect and clearly defined professional boundaries. The Harold Bennett Construction Ethics Foundation has awarded its first scholarships. Sarah Martinez announced, showing me a folder of recipient information. 15 women received full funding for construction management education, and 12 small construction companies received grants for safety equipment upgrades. The foundation's activities had extended my grandfather's ethical legacy throughout the region, creating ripple effects that would improve construction industry standards for decades to come. Emma Marcus Rodriguez said, returning to our meeting with employee representatives, "The workforce has voted unanimously to recommend Bennett Construction for the National Construction Excellence Award. The application deadline is next month, and we believe your company's transformation could serve as a model for the entire industry." The national recognition opportunity represented validation that Bennett Construction's ethical transformation had achieved significance beyond our regional market. As I reviewed the comprehensive evidence of positive change, I realized that my grandfather's faith in my character and abilities had been completely vindicated. Bennett Construction had not just survived my father's criminal leadership, but had flourished under ethical management in ways that exceeded the company's historical performance. 1 year after that evening, that changed everything. I stood before the Southwest Construction Alliance's annual conference, addressing an audience of over 500 construction professionals as the keynote speaker. The woman who had been publicly humiliated at what she thought would be a retirement party had become a recognized leader in industry ethics and innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, I began looking out at faces that represented every aspect of the construction industry. I want to tell you about the most important lesson I've learned in business integrity isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the most profitable approach to long-term success. The past year had provided abundant evidence for that principle. Bennett Construction's revenue had increased by 130%, employee retention had reached 99%, and client satisfaction scores consistently rated our company as the regional leader in quality and reliability. When my father announced his succession plans at his retirement party, he said I would be lucky to get a job in fast food. I continued earning knowing chuckles from audience members who had followed our story. What he didn't understand was that by attempting to humiliate me publicly, he was actually demonstrating the character differences that would determine our respective fates. James Bennett had been transferred to a federal penitentiary in Texas, where he was serving his 18-year sentence for financial crimes and witness intimidation. Prison reports indicated that he continued to blame everyone except himself for his circumstances, showing no sign of the character growth that might have led to reduced sentences or early release consideration. Tyler Bennett, my brother, chose a different path. I continued gesturing toward the front row where Tyler sat with Jennifer and their children. When faced with the consequences of his poor choices, Tyler accepted responsibility, cooperated with federal investigators, and committed himself to becoming the person our grandfather had hoped he could be. Tyler had completed his probationary period as a supervised employee and had recently been promoted to project manager based on his demonstrated competence and ethical behavior. His transformation had been genuine and sustained, earning the respect of employees who had initially been skeptical about giving him a second chance. Tyler now serves as Bennett Construction's Director of Safety and Ethics Training, a position he created by recognizing that our industry needs systematic approaches to preventing the kind of corruption that damaged so many companies in our region. I explained. His work developing ethics training programs had attracted attention from construction companies throughout the Southwest, creating consulting opportunities that enhanced both Tyler's professional reputation and Bennett Construction's industry leadership position. My mother Linda discovered that her years of silent observation had actually prepared her to become a successful business owner in her own right. I continued noting Linda's presence at the conference with several of her interior design employees. Linda Bennett Design had grown into a 20-person company that partnered not just with Bennett Construction, but with architectural firms and other contractors throughout the region. Her business had been featured in regional design magazines as an example of sophisticated interior design that enhanced construction project value. The Harold Bennett Construction Ethics Foundation has now provided scholarships for over 100 women pursuing construction careers, funded safety equipment upgrades for 43 small construction companies, and supported research that has improved industry safety standards. I announced, drawing sustained applause from the audience. The foundation's work had become a model for industry self-regulation and professional development, demonstrating how successful companies could contribute to broader improvements in construction practices. But the most important lesson from our family's experience is that character cannot be faked indefinitely. I said, reaching the heart of my message to the industry audience. Ethical behavior isn't just about following rules or avoiding criminal prosecution. It's about building the kind of relationships and reputation that create sustainable success. I gestured toward Marcus Rodriguez and the other Bennett Construction employees who had attended the conference. The people who work most closely with you know exactly what kind of person you really are. They know whether your success is based on competence or manipulation, whether your leadership is based on respect or fear, and whether your business practices serve your community or exploit it. Marcus had been promoted to operations director and had become a sought-after speaker on construction management topics. His transition from foreman to executive demonstrated how ethical leadership could identify and develop talent that might be overlooked in less supportive environments. The construction industry has a choice to make. I continued building toward my conclusion. We can continue to tolerate the corruption, corner-cutting, and worker exploitation that gave our profession a reputation for dishonesty, or we can demonstrate that construction can be a model for ethical business practices that serve our communities honorably. The audience response was enthusiastic, reflecting a growing industry consensus that ethical construction practices were not just morally superior, but also more profitable and sustainable than traditional approaches. Bennett Construction's transformation over the past year has shown that ethical leadership produces superior financial results, higher employee satisfaction, better client relationships, and stronger community reputation. I concluded, integrity isn't a burden that successful businesses must carry. It's the foundation that makes genuine success possible. As I left the podium to sustained applause, I reflected on how completely my understanding of success had been transformed. The career recognition I had desperately sought from my father had been replaced by something far more valuable, the knowledge that I had built something meaningful that served purposes beyond my own advancement. Sarah Martinez approached me after my speech with a final folder of legal documents. "Emma, there's one more surprise from your grandfather's estate planning that I've been saving for the first anniversary of your inheritance." She opened the folder to reveal a handwritten letter bearing my grandfather's familiar script, along with keys and property deeds I didn't recognize. "Harold purchased a building in downtown Phoenix specifically for Bennett Construction's future expansion," Sarah explained. "He believed that ethical construction companies would eventually dominate the market, and he wanted to ensure you would have the resources to grow as large as your integrity would allow." The building was a 40,000 square foot facility that would provide space for Bennett Construction to double its current workforce, while also housing the Ethics Foundation and Linda's interior design business under one roof. As I held the keys to a future my grandfather had envisioned, but never lived to see, I understood the final lesson from our family's crisis. Harold Bennett had known that true leadership isn't about controlling others or accumulating personal wealth. It's about creating value that extends beyond yourself and building institutions that serve purposes larger than individual success. Tyler approached with his own reflection on our journey. "Emma, I know I can never fully make up for the pain I caused you during the worst period of our family's history, but I want you to know that watching you transform Bennett Construction has taught me what leadership really looks like." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You could have excluded me completely after everything that happened, but you gave me the chance to prove I could change. That generosity has made me a better father, a better husband, and a better person." The relationship Tyler and I had built over the past year was stronger than anything we had experienced growing up. It was based on mutual respect, clear expectations, and shared commitment to values rather than the fear and manipulation that had characterized our father's approach to family relationships. "Emma," my mother said, joining our family conversation, "I want you to know how proud your grandfather would be of the woman you've become and the company you've built. Harold always believed that Bennett Construction could become a model for ethical business practices, and you've exceeded even his ambitious vision." Linda's own transformation had been remarkable. The quiet, seemingly passive wife who had endured years of emotional abuse had revealed herself to be a strategic thinker and successful entrepreneur who had been gathering strength and planning her independence long before the crisis that freed her. As we prepared to leave the conference, Marcus Rodriguez made one final observation. "Emma, the construction workers talk about you differently than they talk about any other business owner we've known. They say you've shown them that construction can be a profession to be proud of rather than just a job to survive." The respect from people who performed the actual work of construction was more meaningful to me than any industry award or business recognition. Building a company culture where everyone felt valued and respected had created the foundation for every other success Bennett Construction had achieved. Before I ask my question, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking this journey with me. Your support, comments, and engagement mean everything to creators like me who pour our hearts into these stories. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you had to choose between staying silent or standing up for what's right, even when it felt scary or difficult. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was trying to undermine you? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and the power of integrity, please hit that like button to help others discover it. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the triumph of good over evil, and share this with someone who might need to hear that their honesty and hard work will eventually be recognized and rewarded. Thank you for being part of this community where we believe that integrity isn't just the right choice, it's the winning choice. Until next time, remember that your character is your greatest asset, and no one can take that away from you.